let's talk a little bit about how to de-radicalize people from the far right, or how to de-radicalize people from the alt-right. This is something that, I've cared deeply about over the years. It's honestly the thing that I would say I'm most proud of about this show. I've done a number of things, but I think this is by far and away the best thing I do. And nothing feels more rewarding than when I was at Politicon a number of times, and there's a meet and greet, and then somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey man, I was going down a real bad path, and you course corrected me. You took me off that bad path, and I couldn't be more thankful over that." That really, touches me. It really makes me feel great. I don't know if there's anything that comes remotely close to that feeling that you get when you're told that. So it means the world to hear it. What I want to do is lay out for you guys some of my thoughts on this, and some of the strategies that I've put into place. By the way, I'm not doing the strategies consciously. I don't have like a step-by-step guide that I go like, did I do the first thing? Did I do the second thing? No, I just naturally end up doing this because it's just part of the way that I communicate when I'm covering the news and the stories that I do. So the first point I want to make, how to de-radicalize somebody from the alt-right. It's a process. It's a process. I think sometimes people are expecting like a quick, immediate flip on everything where they just snap out of it and they're like, I'm no longer an extremist. That very rarely, if ever, happens. De-radicalization is a process that takes time, and oftentimes the people are going to slowly but surely move in the right direction when they're by themselves in their own room, kind of pondering things and noticing contradictions, and they get to a point where they can't sort of double down on their wrong ideology. So it's a process, except that it takes a while. It's okay that it takes a while. It's okay that it takes a while. Think about it, to make a corny analogy here, think about like gardening. You can plant a seed, but the seed is going to have to grow. You don't put the seed in the ground and then, you go inside for some lemonade and come out and boom, would you look at that? It's already fully bloomed. That's not how it works. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to believe within reason as much as possible in engagement. You have to make an effort to connect, make an effort to communicate. Now, this doesn't mean, by the way, that there aren't some people who are what I call here TFGs, which stands for too far gones. There's always going to be TFGs. They've existed in every society throughout history. Some people are very rigid and they will not break free from their ideology no matter what the counter evidence is. But I'm optimistic in the sense that I think the TFG percentage is a lot less than many others do. And some might even appear like they're TFGs. But ultimately, they end up not being TFGs. A great example is that guy by the name of Daryl Davis, he's a black musician, and he's made a point in his life to connect with and talk to virulent racists and white supremacists and literal people who are in the KKK. And when he starts with them, they have their defenses up, and they despise him, and they'll, repeat statistics about black crime right to his face and imply, if not outright say, he's a criminal. And over time, with engagement, with direct responses, with a real connection, he wears them down. And eventually, he has, I don't even know how many dozens or hundreds of KKK robes that when people finally leave the KKK, they send him the robe and say, thank you for sort of opening my eyes. So engaging is a big part of it. If you just silo yourself off and use shame as a tactic and moral judgment and finger wagging, that's much less likely to work. Direct engagement is the best possible way to get movement in the right direction. Another point is, and maybe this one will be controversial, I don't know, but it's certainly part of what I like to do, is be normal. Be normal. You're a normal person, I'm a normal person, most people are normal people, even if, somebody has some extremist characteristics or policy ideas or thoughts or tendencies. If you come across like a normal person, you're much more likely to get through. If somebody seems to be putting on a show, or there's a veneer, or there's some kabuki theater that they're doing, they're playing some sort of role, people are much more likely to shut off when you do that. Now, of course, what is and isn't quote-unquote normal is like, I guess you could say up for debate, but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying. Communicate like a normal person. I also like this idea of countering what is the negative stereotypes of the left. People who aren't on the left have this caricature of the left in their mind where it's like they're super loud, super obnoxious, very rigid in their mindset, completely intolerant even though they pretend to embrace tolerance. They're authoritarian even though they think they're not authoritarian. And you shouldn't be any of those things or do any of those things. Don't shout over people. Don't be so rigid that you're not open to having your own mind change from time to time. I think if you counter that stereotype of the left, then you're going to have a more receptive audience. Now, that's not, by the way, that's not me saying, give up on who you are. That's not me saying tell the right what they want to hear to then deconvert them, because that's counterproductive. That wouldn't change anybody's mind on the right, and then you would be acting as a pawn for them. So don't misconstrue what I'm saying here when I make that point. I'm just saying tendencies that are generally agreed upon or characteristics that are generally agreed upon to be objectively annoying, that you would hate in somebody else, don't embody those characteristics and qualities yourself, because you're not above something being objectively annoying. You can't say, but I'm me, so when I do it, it's okay. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who genuinely think I'm me, and when I do it, it's okay. So counter the stereotype of the left. Be normal to the extent that normal is even a thing. Then we get to this idea of you can't essentialize, and you can't paint with a broad brush about those who disagree. In other words, tribalism and partisan hackery is very, very bad. Don't be tribal and don't be a partisan hack. And so one of my biggest pet peeves is hearing other commentators who are on the left say things like, and the right wing always says this, and the right wing always does this, and Republicans always do this. And would it really be that much more difficult to throw a qualifier in there? To say, the far right does this, the elected Republicans do this. Because if you put the qualifier, all of a sudden a statement might just become flat out true. When if you say, Republicans do this, or right-wingers are like that, what you're doing is taking anybody who even mildly associates with the right, you immediately turn them off and they shut down, and now you're the enemy. And now, anything you say is going to be put through the ringer and shredded 1,000 different ways to Sunday. So, in other words, be precise in your language. Don't essentialize people. Don't act like they are they are the worst things of the other stereotype. Be specific in your language. Don't paint with a broad brush. And look, this is an issue that the left seems to understand well when it comes to minority groups. And when it comes, like, for example, when somebody on the right would say, we got a Muslim problem, everybody on the left would be like, whoa, what the fuck is that? Like, why would you say that? If you want to make the argument there's a problem with jihadists, right? Then it's like, okay, I understand why you would say that. That makes perfect sense. But if you say we have a Muslim problem, it's like, what the fuck? So use that same logic when engaging with the right. It's not like right-wingers are bad, full stop, or Republicans are bad, full stop. No, it's the far right is bad, and elected Republicans are a problem, because that's more accurate. I get there's a difference between a religion and an ideological perspective, of course, but I'm just saying don't essentialize and paint with a broad brush when you could use precise language instead, which makes other people much more receptive to your ideas. Then we have another point, which I think is going to be a controversial point, but listen to my explanation, because every part of this matters, okay? You have to give credit where it's due and find common ground wherever possible. Now, people who don't like me or don't like this show hear that, and then they probably think what Kyle is saying is, tell the right what they want to hear, and that's the best way to deconvert the right, which really isn't deconverting the right. It's just you agreeing with the right. That's what some people who don't like me and don't like this show might think when I say that. That is not at all what I'm saying. What I'm talking about is intellectual honesty. So, in other words, there are plenty of people on the right who I disagree with vehemently on a million things. Let's just take Ron Paul, for example, right? So many things I think he's comically wrong on. He's completely in favor of market deregulation, which has all these problems of externalities and pollution, and we could talk about it all day, right? He also wants super low taxes, including on the wealthy, and I think that's an abysmal system that exacerbates income and wealth inequality, and it's unsustainable. And he has this philosophical commitment to Ayn Randian type economics, to almost anarcho-capitalism in a way. Now, I disagree with him vociferously on so many things, and when I do, I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to be specific about here's where I disagree, and here's why I think you're wrong, etc. But when it comes to like a foreign policy issue, or legalizing marijuana, or drugs in general, or civil liberties, the NSA, the Patriot Act, stuff like that, Ron Paul and I have 97% agreement. Why would I bury that fact? Why would I hide that fact? Why would I not talk about that fact? Why would I not give credit where credit is due when I actually just flat out agree with him? When you do that, people see intellectual honesty and consistency, where now somebody who is a libertarian and might be a committed libertarian, here's the areas where I give Ron Paul credit, and they're like, that Kyle, maybe he's not all bad. He gave credit to Ron Paul for this, and I agree with Ron Paul on that, and I sort of like the arguments Kyle made to bolster Ron Paul's point on that front. See, now you've gotten yourself in a position where the resistance is crumbling. And so now when I make a point about the minimum wage, for example, where Ron Paul is dead wrong, they're much more likely to hear the argument. Now, maybe they don't get convinced. Maybe they do. Maybe it begins the process where eventually they get convinced. But it all started from this place of, hey, you know what, man? Good point. But I find so many people, they don't have the ability to just be like, credit where it's due, I agree. It's always like, let's go one layer deeper and talk about the motivations of why you did X, Y, and Z, and maybe they're not pure motivations. Maybe they're actually bad motivations, and maybe when you're right, you're actually wrong. It's like, shut the fuck up. No, just be honest. Just be honest. It's not that I swear to you guys, it's not that difficult. It really isn't. So that's another super important point. If you give credit where it's due and you find common ground wherever possible and you actually talk about those things, then when you actually do disagree, and by the way, you should where you do disagree, people are much more likely to listen. And you don't have to sugarcoat where you disagree. You can say, look, you're very wrong, and here's why I think you're wrong, and then lay it out. And maybe you convince them, maybe you don't, but at least now the dialogue is happening, and it's a real dialogue. Another point is, for people on the left, they totally need to drop this idea of purity of character. In other words, yes, I know you might think it's a tired point, I know you might think it's annoying, but it's true. Enough with the quote-unquote cancel culture stuff. I don't care if you made a politically incorrect joke in 1997. I don't care if you tweeted things that are offensive. I don't care if you went to prison for a terrible crime and now you're out and you've changed your life and reformed. I'm not going to hold that crime over your head. Purity of character is a myth because nobody has a pure character. We've all said something dumb. We've all believed stupid things at one point or another in our lives. This idea that, we all come out of the womb and we're Noam Chomsky? Fuck out of here. Like, it's just not the case. So anything involving purity of character, just drop it. It makes you look like a self-righteous, pompous, arrogant, stick-up-your-ass, virtue-signaling prick when you're nitpicking other people's qualities or characteristics or jokes or offensive beliefs they may have had previously. It's just a waste of time, and it's a waste of effort, and it's a thing that separates us out and makes people hate each other more and want to slit each other's throats more, and it is the antithesis of solidarity. So drop the purity of character stuff, embrace an edgy culture, and understand there is a purity test that matters. It's purity of policy. Like, you have to agree on the broad strokes of what it means to be a leftist, which is like, hey, let's use the power of the government and the community to improve people's lives and make our existence on this planet better, healthier, more joyous, more fair, etc., etc. So you should care about purity of policy. You should not care about purity of character. Purity of character is dumb, it's a myth, and it's super counterproductive and anti-solidarity to harp away on that stuff. And unfortunately, I do see a trend of many people on the left so focused on purity of character, they almost don't even think about policy or talk about policy. So that's a super important point that I can't stress enough. And the final point is, you need to highlight, when you're trying to deconvert people and de-radicalize people, you need to highlight that politics, it's about principles. So, like, what do you value? What's a principle of yours? It's about improving lives, and it's about how society should be if it's functioning in an ideal or more ideal sense. Like, that's what politics is really about. And when you make that point, and when you stress those things, it's you could have a light bulb moment, people can, where they realize, like, oh, maybe like all of this over-the-top, super niche online culture war stuff is actually a diversion. Maybe it's actually something that is the divide and conquer that the elites and the establishment and the 1% want. They want you to fight endlessly about culture war shit and beat each other's throats, as opposed to noticing the overarching themes which drive our politics. If you are committed to a politics that's about principles, improving lives, and how society should function in an ideal sense or a more ideal sense and getting closer to that, you're so much more likely to start bringing people to the way you think. And unfortunately, I don't think many people look at politics in that sort of a way anymore. I don't. I think some do, but you need to not only do that, but also be an evangelist for that same sort of mindset. And when you focus a politics on principles, oftentimes what you could do is, and this is one of the most interesting parts of dialogue that can deconvert people, is you use values that people claim they have to make them become more of a leftist. So, for example, a lot of right-wingers think, like, I'm a big supporter of freedom. I believe in freedom. Well, guess what? I'm a leftist, and that is probably the main ideal and value that animates my worldview. And so, if we agree that freedom is a good thing, right? Well, then now I need to make a case for freedom that bolsters leftist values and policy ideas. So, for example, you point out to somebody who might consider themselves on the right or even the alt-right or whatever, and I believe in freedom, and it's like, okay, well, we just covered a story of voting to legalize marijuana or decriminalize marijuana happening in the House. There are only like 2 or 3 Republicans who voted to decriminalize marijuana. Almost every Democrat except 2 voted to legalize marijuana. So at least the Republican Party does not believe in freedom as a value, because they're against, this is one of the most basic, obvious layup issues for those who believe in freedom. I mean, you had Republicans arguing against the idea of, well, since kids exist, we can't legalize marijuana because maybe they'll have it. Nobody's talking about legalizing it for kids. Adults can't have things that adults can partake in because kids exist. So should we ban porn? Should we ban alcohol? No, that's deeply authoritarian. So point out the contradictions. Point out, in an economic sense, how free are you really if your basic needs aren't met? You don't have a roof over your head. You don't have food in your belly. Are you really free? You're free to be homeless. You're free to starve. You're free to die. You're not really free if the basic needs aren't met in an economic sense. So maybe bare minimum economic security actually is part and parcel of freedom and the value of freedom and the principle of freedom. So take the values that they claim to hold and make a left argument that says actually leftist policy ideas are more so the embodiment of the freedom that you say you believe in. So I guess you're on the left. And so, look, I'll cut the segment off now. We've been going on for a while, but you can see this is a topic that I care deeply about, and it is the thing I'm most proud of by far and away. Whenever anybody comes up to me and tells me, hey man, I used to be a Ben Shapiro fan, I used to be a Steven Crowder fan, I used to listen to Tucker Carlson, or some people even went further down that rabbit hole, and I was all about Stefan Molyneux or whoever, and they say, you helped get me out of that. The things that I'm explaining to you now, it's how you can get through to a lot of people. It's how, you can change minds for the better. And I've never seen any sort of empirical study, objective study on just how many people obviously nobody studied how many people I've deconverted, but I've never seen empirical studies on these tactics that I'm laying out for you. I don't even know how you would empirically study it, but I can assure you the stuff I'm talking about here works. And insofar as that is your goal, these are some tips. Now, some people will just say, look, Kyle, that's not my goal. I'm not interested in that. Okay, fair enough. Then, there's no argument here. You do whatever you want to do. But I find that this way of communicating, taking this approach, can not only change minds of people who disagree, but also is a kind of communication that even those who agree with you already appreciate it. Because, when I do a show, I'm not just trying to preach to the choir. I'm trying to craft things in a way where even my biggest critics stop and go, I don't like him, but he might have a point on that one. And then the process begins. So again, to reiterate, final point, and I'll reiterate the first point again here. It's a process, deradicalization. Accept that. It takes a while. When you plant a seed, it needs time to grow. But the important thing is getting that process started. And I hope I gave you guys some pointers and some tips here that can help expand the tent and make it so that the positions are so overwhelmingly obvious to such a strong majority of people that we're all willing to take more direct action to create a better world, to get people universal health care, to get a living wage, to increase unionization, legalize weed, to end the wars, et cetera, et cetera. I hope this helps. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.